Hello there, gentle dreamers. Tonight, we journey with Alice Cullen, the vampire who sees every possible future but cannot remember a single moment of her past. The eternal optimist born from institutional darkness, the one who chose her family through visions before she ever met them in flesh. She is the seer without memory, the prophet without history, the small, graceful creature whose gift saved everyone she loved again and again across the decades. So, before you settle in, I want to share something small from my heart. I have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers before the month ends. If you feel connected to these stories and want to help me grow, I'd be so grateful if you subscribed. Well, now it's time. Let us ease into a peaceful moment together and let Alice's extraordinary existence carry you softly into rest. Biloxi, Mississippi, in 1901, was a city balanced between centuries, a place where the Old South clung to traditions and hierarchies, even as the new century promised progress and change that would transform everything familiar into something unrecognizable. The Gulf Coast humidity made every summer day feel like living inside someone's mouth. The air thick and wet and heavy with salt, and the smell of fish and the particular vegetation that thrived in that climate. The heat so oppressive that people moved slowly and spoke slowly, and planned their entire days around the few hours when direct sunlight was not actively punishing. It was a world of strict social codes and stricter expectations, where families guarded their reputations with fierce vigilance, where any deviation from accepted normalcy could destroy generations of carefully maintained respectability, where being different in any visible way meant becoming invisible in all the ways that mattered to a society built on conformity and tradition. Mary Alice Brandon was born into this world on a spring day when the magnolias were blooming and filling the air with their heavy perfume. A small, delicate baby with unusual features even then. Her eyes too large for her face in ways that would persist throughout her human life. Her movements quick and bird-like from the moment she could move independently. Her father worked in a position that suggested middle-class respectability without exceptional wealth, the kind of man who cared deeply about appearances and propriety and what the neighbors might think, whose entire sense of self-worth derived from his standing in the community and his family's reflection on his character. Her mother was gentle and anxious in equal measure, a woman who had learned that keeping peace meant keeping quiet, that smoothing over difficulties was always preferable to addressing them directly, that pretending problems did not exist was the proper way to handle anything that might threaten the family's carefully maintained facade of normalcy. Mary Alice had a younger sister whose name would be lost to memory along with so much else. A more conventional child who did not see things that had not happened yet, who did not wake screaming about events that would occur 3 days later, who did not make her parents exchange worried glances across the dinner table when she spoke with absolute certainty about things she could not possibly know. The sister would grow up and marry and have children and die of old age, having lived an entirely unremarkable life, and she would tell her grandchildren occasionally about her strange older sister who had been sent away when she was young, the one nobody spoke about, the family shame that had been carefully erased from official history. The visions began when Mary Alice was very young, perhaps 4 or 5 years old. Manifestations that started small and grew progressively more frequent and more detailed as she aged into childhood and then adolescence. She would announce that Aunt Margaret was coming to visit hours before any telegram arrived, would insist that the butcher's son was going to break his arm falling from the tree on Thursday, and then be proven horrifyingly correct when Thursday came, would wake crying about the neighbor's house burning and have to be consoled through her terror only to watch those same flames consume that same house within the week. At first, her parents tried to convince themselves these were coincidences, lucky guesses, the kind of strange intuition that some children possessed and would outgrow with proper guidance and discipline and enough discouragement to make the behavior stop. But the visions did not stop. They intensified and became more specific and more undeniable. And Mary Alice's desperate attempts to make her parents understand what she was experiencing only frightened them more deeply, made them more certain that something was profoundly wrong with their eldest daughter, something shameful and dangerous that needed to be hidden from the community before it destroyed the family's standing entirely. Her father began to see her gift as evidence of moral failing or spiritual corruption, something that reflected poorly on his household and his authority, something that needed to be corrected through discipline and prayer and increasingly harsh punishments that accomplished nothing except making Mary Alice learn to hide her visions rather than share them. Her mother vacillated between fear of her daughter and fear for her daughter, between believing that Mary Alice was somehow evil or possessed and desperately wanting to protect her child from a world that would judge her even more harshly than her own parents did. The conflict between these impulses left her paralyzed and ineffective, unable to advocate for Mary Alice when her father's frustration turned to anger, unable to provide the understanding and acceptance that might have made the visions feel less isolating and terrifying. Mary Alice learned that her mother's love was real but insufficient, that being loved was not the same as being understood or protected, that sometimes the people who cared about you most could still fail you completely when their own fears outweighed their compassion. School was difficult in ways that compounded her isolation, the other children sensing her difference even when they could not articulate what made her strange, her teachers noting her distracted attention and her tendency to speak out of turn about things that had not happened yet, the mounting evidence that Mary Alice Brandon was not quite right in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. She was intelligent and observant beyond what her actual age should allow, her mind working constantly to process both present reality and future possibilities simultaneously, the visions creating a layered experience of time that no one around her could understand or accommodate. She tried to make friends, but found that relationships were impossible when you already knew how they would end, when you could see the betrayal or the abandonment or the simple fading of interest that would occur in 6 months or a year, when present interactions were always shadowed by future knowledge that made genuine connection feel futile. The visions themselves were not simple prophecies, but complex branching possibilities, futures that shifted and changed with every decision made by every person, whose actions intersected with the outcomes she perceived. She would see multiple versions of the same event simultaneously, understanding that if her father turned left instead of right on his way to work, he would avoid the accident that would injure him in the first timeline. Seeing how one choice created cascading effects that transformed everything downstream from that decision point, the gift was overwhelming and impossible to explain to people who experienced time as linear progression, who could not imagine perceiving reality as constant branching network of possibilities rather than single fixed path from past to present to future. As Mary Alice moved into adolescence, the social consequences of her strangeness intensified along with the visions themselves. Other girls her age were focused on courtship and marriage prospects and maintaining their reputations, on the social rituals and expectations that would determine their entire futures in that time and place, while Mary Alice was increasingly withdrawn and isolated, marked as strange in ways that made her unmarriageable, unsuitable for the conventional life that was supposed to be every young woman's goal and destiny. Her father's shame deepened into something harder and more bitter, his disappointment in his eldest daughter consuming whatever paternal affection he might have once possessed, his growing conviction that she was cursed or insane or deliberately defying proper behavior through her continued insistence on speaking about her visions despite punishment and prohibition. Her mother grew more anxious and more frightened as Mary Alice's visions became impossible to dismiss as childish fantasy or active imagination, as the accuracy of her predictions made it clear that something genuinely unusual was happening, something that had no explanation within their understanding of how the world worked. The fear that Mary Alice might be possessed or mad or somehow tainted competed with maternal instinct to protect, creating paralysis that left Mary Alice increasingly alone even within her own family, increasingly aware that she was a problem her parents could not solve and did not want to acknowledge, burden rather than daughter, shame rather than child. The progression toward institutionalization happened gradually and then suddenly, the way such things often occurred in families that could not or would not address difficulties directly until crisis forced action. There was an incident that served as catalyst, though the specific details would be lost to the amnesia that followed transformation. Some vision Mary Alice spoke aloud at the wrong moment in front of the wrong people. Some prediction that proved accurate in ways that could not be explained away or dismissed. Some final breaking point where her father's shame overwhelmed whatever reluctance he felt about sending his daughter away to an asylum. The decision was framed as necessary for her own good, as protection and treatment rather than abandonment, as the only responsible choice given her condition and the danger she supposedly posed to herself and others through her delusions and her hysteria and her refusal to behave normally despite years of correction and discipline. The asylum accepted her sometime around 1920, when she was approximately 19 years old, though the exact date was not recorded in any memory that survived her transformation. The institution standing as Gothic monument to society's preferred method of handling anyone who did not fit neatly into expected categories of behavior and thought and perception. Mental institutions in the 1920s American South were warehouses more than hospitals, places where inconvenient family members could be stored and forgotten, where treatment meant restraint and isolation and experimental procedures that caused more harm than healing, where the primary goal was containment rather than cure. The conditions were deliberately harsh, the understanding being that madness needed to be controlled through discipline and deprivation. That comfort would only encourage patients to persist in their delusions rather than accepting proper reality and proper behavior. Mary Alice lost her name somewhere in the admission process, becoming patient number and case file rather than person. Her identity reduced to diagnosis and symptoms and notes about her particular brand of hysteria and her persistent delusions about seeing the future. The asylum stripped away everything that made her herself, taking her clothes and her belongings and her dignity, dressing her in institutional garments that marked her as inmate rather than individual, cutting her hair short in ways that made her look even younger and more vulnerable, processing her through bureaucratic mechanisms that transformed daughter and sister into medical problem requiring management and control. Her visions continued unabated because they were not delusions or hysteria, but genuine perception of actual future events. But there was no one in the asylum who would believe her or understand what she was experiencing. No context where her gift could be recognized as anything except further evidence of her insanity. The treatments were barbaric by any measure, though they were considered standard practice for the time and the setting. Isolation in small, dark rooms for days or weeks when she spoke about her visions. Restraints that held her immobile when she became agitated by seeing terrible futures and trying to warn people who interpreted her warnings as violent outbursts requiring suppression. Cold water treatments and other physical interventions designed to shock her system into normalcy that had no effect except making her suffering worse. She learned to hide her visions even more carefully than she had learned to hide them at home, understanding that any mention of seeing the future would bring punishment, that survival meant pretending to experience time the way normal people experienced it, even as the futures continued branching and shifting in her mind constantly. The isolation was profound and complete in ways that went beyond simple physical separation from family and society. She was alone among people who were genuinely mad, whose grip on reality was tenuous or non-existent, whose behaviors and delusions made meaningful connection impossible. And she was alone among staff who saw her as case study rather than person, whose interactions were clinical or punitive rather than human. The other patients avoided her when they could, some instinct making them uncomfortable in her presence, the way people would later be uncomfortable around Fred. Some unconscious awareness that she was different in ways that went beyond simple madness into territory that triggered deeper unease. The asylum workers treated her with indifferent cruelty that was standard for their profession and their era, neither actively malicious nor remotely compassionate, simply processing her through the institutional routines that structured every day in that place. But even in that darkness, even in that isolation and suffering and erasure of identity, Mary Alice's visions persisted and eventually showed her something that would save her life. She saw a vampire, a creature she did not yet have name for but recognized as predator and monster, and death approaching with terrible certainty. She saw James the tracker moving through the asylum's halls with patient hunting focus, following her scent, planning her death with the kind of careful attention he gave to prey that interested him particularly. She saw herself dying at his hands, torn apart by strength and speed that no human could resist or escape. her brief, miserable life ending in violence and terror in the institution that was supposed to be protecting her. But she also saw another vampire, a male who worked at the asylum, someone who had been changed and abandoned himself, someone whose motivations for being there remained unclear, but whose presence would intersect with her timeline at the crucial moment when James came for her. She saw this vampire reaching her first, saw the transformation he would perform, not from any altruistic motive, but from some calculation she could not fully perceive, some reason that made her survival valuable to him in that specific moment. She saw herself waking as vampire with her memories gone, but her gift intact and amplified, saw futures branching from that transformation that led eventually to happiness and family and purpose, saw that this terrible thing that was about to happen to her was also the only path that led anywhere except death and erasure and complete meaninglessness. The night James came for her was the last night of her human existence, though she did not know his name or his nature except through visions that showed her what was approaching. The asylum at night was different from its daytime horror, quieter and darker, and somehow more threatening. The reduced staff and the locked doors creating atmosphere where anything might happen without witness or intervention. James moved through the building with supernatural stealth, his hunting instinct guiding him toward her room, his anticipation building as he approached prey he had tracked for days and was finally ready to claim. But the other vampire reached her first, entering her room minutes before James would have arrived, making the split-second decision to transform her rather than let James have her. His reasons remaining mysterious, but his actions saving her from immediate death. The transformation began with venom pumping into her bloodstream through bite that was clinical rather than savage. The vampire worker performing the change with efficient detachment and then immediately departing, abandoning her to the burning without explanation or guidance or any indication of why he had chosen to save her at all. Mary Alice burned alone in her asylum bed, the pain consuming everything, her consciousness fragmenting under assault of transformation that was remaking her at cellular level, her memories dissolving like morning mist as the venom worked through her system and rewrote her fundamental nature. When she woke 3 days later, she was no longer Mary Alice Brandon, patient at the asylum. She was something new and powerful and completely alone, waking not in the institution but in Forest, where her creator had apparently deposited her unconscious body before fleeing the scene of his own impulsive action. She woke as vampire with no memory of her human life, no context for what she had become, no understanding of what had happened to her except what her visions showed her about her own immediate past and branching possible futures spreading ahead of her like map of territory. She would have to navigate without guide or companion or any preparation, except the gift that had survived transformation intact and amplified beyond anything her human mind had been capable of processing. The forest where Alice woke was dense and ancient, somewhere in the wilderness outside Biloxi, where her creator had apparently carried her unconscious transforming body and left her to complete the change alone. The trees towering overhead with trunks thick enough that 3 men could not have circled them with linked arms. The undergrowth tangled and wild in ways that spoke of land untouched by human cultivation or interference. The darkness should have been absolute to human eyes, but her new vision saw everything with crystalline clarity that made night irrelevant. Every leaf and branch and insect visible in detail that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. The world transformed from the dim, uncertain place she vaguely remembered into something sharp and vivid and overwhelming in its intensity and complexity. She opened her eyes and knew immediately that something fundamental had changed, that she was no longer what she had been, though she could not remember clearly what that previous existence had entailed, or who she had been before this moment of awakening. Her name was Alice. She knew that much with certainty that felt instinctive rather than remembered, the syllables familiar on her tongue, though she could not recall who had given her that name, or what surname might have followed it, or what life she had lived carrying that identity. Everything else was blank, not dark or shadowed, but simply absent, missing in ways that suggested the memories had been erased, rather than merely forgotten, deleted from her mind as thoroughly as if they had never existed at all. But while her past was gone, her future spread before her in branching possibilities that she could see with perfect clarity, multiple timelines unfolding simultaneously from every potential choice she might make in this moment and the next and the one after that. The visions were not new. She understood somehow without remembering. This ability to see futures had been part of her before, though perhaps not with this intensity or this precision or this overwhelming comprehensive scope. She saw herself hunting in the next few minutes, saw the deer she would catch and drain, saw her own horror at what she was and what she would do, saw alternate futures where she tried to resist the burning thirst in her throat and failed catastrophically, saw branches that led to death and discovery and decades of isolated wandering. The thirst was immediate and all-consuming, burning in her throat with intensity that made thought nearly impossible, demanding satisfaction with urgency that felt like biological imperative rather than simple desire or preference. She moved without conscious decision, her new body responding with speed and grace that felt utterly natural despite being impossible by any human standard, covering ground that would have taken minutes to traverse at human pace in seconds of flowing motion that required no effort or planning. The deer never saw her coming, its death swift and efficient, her instincts guiding her through actions she had never performed, but her body knew how to execute perfectly. The blood eased the burning slightly, though it did not extinguish it completely, would never extinguish it completely. She understood, through visions that showed her decades ahead, where the thirst remained constant companion, requiring eternal management and control. But with the immediate urgency satisfied enough to allow rational thought, she could begin to process what had happened to her and what she had become, examining herself and her circumstances with a careful analytical attention that felt familiar, even though she could not remember learning this approach or applying it to previous problems in a past she no longer possessed. She was vampire. She understood through combination of instinct and vision, immortal predator designed by nature to hunt humans with perfect efficiency, transformed from whatever she had been before into apex creature that would never age or sicken or die except through violence or voluntary cessation. Her skin was hard as stone and cold as marble, pale and flawless in ways that would make her beautiful to human eyes, but also subtly wrong, too perfect to be entirely natural or entirely safe. Her senses were enhanced beyond human capability, hearing sounds miles away, smelling individual scents in complex mixtures that would have been indistinguishable to normal perception, seeing details and distances that human vision could never capture or process. But more significant than these physical transformations was her gift, the ability to see futures that had survived her change and emerged amplified and refined, no longer limited by human neurology or human lifespan considerations. She could search the branching possibilities deliberately now, focusing on specific questions or specific people and watching how their decisions would create cascading consequences, seeing not just immediate outcomes, but long chains of causation that extended years or decades into multiple possible timelines. She could see her own futures most clearly, watching herself make choices and seeing where each option would lead, understanding that she possessed unprecedented ability to optimize her path through existence by selecting the decisions that led to the outcomes she preferred. The overwhelming nature of constant vision required learning to manage and filter, developing mental discipline to exist in the present moment, rather than getting lost in the infinite branching possibilities that surrounded every instant of existence. She taught herself through trial and error over her first hours and days as vampire, practicing focusing on immediate reality while keeping the visions accessible but not dominant, learning to search deliberately rather than being passively flooded with every possible future simultaneously. It was exhausting and disorienting initially, the constant splitting of her attention between what was happening and what might happen, creating mental strain that had no physical analog. But gradually she developed techniques and habits that made the dual awareness manageable, if never entirely comfortable. She discovered the limitations of her gift through experimentation and observation, noting what she could see and what remained frustratingly opaque to her enhanced perception. She could see the futures of individuals whose decisions affected outcomes, could track cause and effect through human and vampire choices, could watch how actions created consequences that rippled forward through time. But there were blind spots, gaps in her vision that took longer to understand and map. She could not see certain creatures that existed at the edges of her awareness, supernatural beings whose nature somehow blocked or disrupted her gift in ways she could not explain or predict. She would learn eventually that these were werewolves and shapeshifters, creatures whose existence operated under different rules than vampires and humans. But in her early days, she simply knew that sometimes her visions went inexplicably dark around certain individuals or certain locations without understanding why. More disturbingly, she could not see her own past, could not use her gift to look backward and recover the memories that had been erased during her transformation. She tried repeatedly in those early nights, searching for any glimpse of who she had been or where she had come from or what circumstances had led to her change, but the past remained absolutely blank, inaccessible to her supernatural sight in ways that suggested it had been destroyed rather than merely hidden. She was Alice, and she was vampire, and she could see infinite possible futures, but her origin remained mysterious and would remain mysterious forever, her existence beginning at the moment of her awakening with nothing before that point, except void where history should have been. The first clear vision of her distant future came perhaps a week after her awakening, crystallizing with sudden perfect clarity that made her gasp, despite not needing to breathe, showing her a male vampire with golden eyes and a body covered in scars, showing her love and partnership and understanding, showing her belonging and purpose and happiness that felt impossible given her current isolation and confusion. She saw him clearly, though they had never met, knew his face and his manner and the profound pain he carried, understood that he would be the most important person in her existence, that finding him and saving him and loving him would define her immortal life in ways that transcended any other goal or purpose she might pursue. But the vision showed her more than just this mysterious scarred vampire. It showed her a family surrounding them both, golden-eyed vampires who lived differently than the red-eyed hunters she occasionally glimpsed in her visions of other immortals. She saw a compassionate patriarch with centuries of experience and unwavering moral conviction, a maternal female whose capacity for love seemed infinite, a mind-reading male who would become like a brother to her, a beautiful, bitter female who would eventually accept her, a jovial, strong male who would make her laugh. She saw the name Cullen and understood that this would be her family, not by blood or by force, but by choice, that these vampires would welcome her and the scarred male when the time came to join them, understanding that her future held happiness and family and purpose, made the present loneliness bearable, gave her reason to endure the isolation and the constant learning and the frightening newness of existence without context or history. She had seen her destination even if the path remained uncertain, had glimpsed the life waiting for her even if she could not yet reach it, had been given the gift of certainty about eventual belonging that most people never possessed, even after lifetimes of searching. She decided to wait and prepare rather than immediately seeking the family she had seen, understanding through careful examination of the branching futures that arriving too early would create complications, that timing mattered in ways that required patience despite her desperate desire for connection and community. The golden eyes indicated a different way of living she understood through observation and deduction. These vampires fed on something other than human blood, though she could not initially determine what alternative they had discovered, or how it worked, or whether she could successfully adopt their lifestyle without guidance. She experimented cautiously, her visions showing her which animals would satisfy the thirst and which would prove insufficient, learning through trial and error to hunt deer and predators rather than humans, discovering that animal blood eased the burning adequately, if not as completely as human blood would have, that she could survive and even thrive on this alternative diet if she committed to it absolutely and never allowed herself to weaken and succumb to the easier, more terrible option. The years between her awakening in 1920 and her eventual meeting with Jasper in 1948 stretched ahead with daunting length. Nearly 3 decades of solitary existence preparing for a future she had seen but could not yet claim. Decades of wandering and hiding and teaching her self-control without teacher or companion or any support except her own determination and the visions that showed her eventual happiness waiting at the end of her patient waiting. She moved constantly to avoid drawing attention, never staying in one location long enough to be noticed or remembered, stealing clothes from washing lines and abandoned houses, learning to pass as human through careful observation and practice, developing the mannerisms and behaviors that would allow her to exist on the margins of human society without triggering suspicion or fear. The loneliness was crushing in ways that even her visions of eventual family could not entirely ameliorate. The fundamental isolation of being completely alone in existence without anyone who understood what she was or what she experienced, without conversation or touch or any acknowledgement of her existence, beyond the frightened reactions of humans who sense predator even when they could not articulate what triggered their unease. She watched the scarred vampire through her visions obsessively, tracking his life and his suffering and his slow journey toward the moment when they would meet, seeing his pain and wishing desperately that she could comfort him, even though their meeting was still years away, and any attempt to reach him prematurely would disrupt the careful timing that would allow their relationship to form properly and endure permanently. She saw him in the sudden vampire wars, saw his creation by a female named Maria, who used him and his gift to feel emotions as weapon in her territorial conflicts, saw the endless cycle of creating and training and destroying newborn armies that left him saturated in death and suffering and horror that his empathic ability forced him to experience directly. She saw his growing exhaustion and despair, his increasing hatred of what he was forced to do, his eventual decision to leave Maria and the wars, despite not knowing where else to go or how else to exist, his wandering period with Peter and Charlotte that provided temporary relief but no lasting purpose or peace. She saw his depression deepening, his self-loathing consuming him, his growing conviction that his existence was curse rather than gift, and that he should perhaps end himself rather than continue carrying the weight of all the death and pain he had caused and felt. And she prepared herself to save him when the time finally came, to be the hope and the certainty and the vision of better future that would give him reason to continue existing, to show him through her absolute confidence in their shared destiny that his suffering had purpose and meaning, that he was not monster but partner, that redemption and happiness and belonging were possible even for someone who had done terrible things and felt every moment of the suffering those things had caused. She saw the diner in Philadelphia where they would meet, saw the specific date and time, saw her own greeting and his shocked response, saw the beginning of everything that would make both their existences worth the centuries of waiting and suffering that preceded that crucial moment. The 28 years between Alice's awakening in 1920 and her meeting with Jasper in 1948 constituted the longest and most difficult period of her immortal existence. Decades of solitary wandering and waiting and watching through visions as her future partner suffered through circumstances she could observe but not yet alleviate. As the timeline slowly progressed toward the moment when their paths would finally intersect and her isolation would end and his suffering would find its answer. She moved constantly through those years, never settling anywhere long enough to establish identity or draw attention, existing on the absolute margins of human society, stealing what she needed to maintain her increasingly sophisticated ability to pass as human, teaching herself through observation and careful practice the mannerisms and behaviors that would allow her to navigate the world without constantly triggering the instinctive unease that humans felt in the presence of predators. The 1920s passed in blur of learning and adjustment. Alice teaching herself the fundamentals of vampire existence without guide or mentor or any support except her visions, discovering through trial and error what her new body could and could not do, what dangers she needed to avoid, and what situations she could navigate safely. She learned that direct sunlight made her skin sparkle with prismatic light that would immediately reveal her supernatural nature, that she needed to confine her movements to cloudy days or nighttime hours when her appearance would not betray what she was to observers who might report their sighting to authorities or spread rumors that would eventually attract attention from other vampires. She discovered other immortals occasionally through her visions, seeing their futures intersecting briefly with hers and carefully altering her path to avoid encounters that her gift showed would end poorly. Understanding that most vampires fed on humans without the ethical complications she had adopted, and would not understand or respect her choice to live differently. The loneliness of those early years was crushing despite her visions of eventual happiness. The fundamental isolation of being completely alone without anyone who understood what she was or what she experienced, without conversation or companionship, or any acknowledgement of her existence beyond the fearful reactions of humans who sensed something wrong about her, even when they could not articulate what triggered their unease. She spent hours and days and weeks watching other people live their lives from distance, observing families and friends and lovers with hunger that had nothing to do with blood, understanding that connection and belonging were things she would eventually have, but could not yet claim, that patience was required even when patience felt impossible, and the waiting stretched ahead with daunting endlessness. The Great Depression that consumed America through the 1930s made her wandering existence slightly easier in some ways. The masses of displaced people and migrants moving across the country in search of work or stability, providing cover for one more anonymous wanderer. The general chaos and suffering of that era, meaning that one strange young woman who never seemed to age drew less attention than she might have in more prosperous and stable times. She moved through the south and then westward, following visions that showed her where she needed to be and when, staying ahead of curious humans and predatory vampires both, her gift allowing her to navigate dangers that would have destroyed a less prescient immortal, attempting to survive alone during their difficult first decades. She perfected her ability to steal what she needed without getting caught, taking clothes from washing lines and abandoned houses, occasionally lifting small amounts of money from locations where her visions showed the theft would go unnoticed or unattributed to her specifically. She taught herself fashion and style through observation and experimentation, developing the aesthetic sense that would eventually become her signature, understanding that appearance mattered in ways that went beyond simple vanity or frivolity, that presenting herself well helped her blend into human society and made her feel less like monster and more like person even when she was completely alone. The clothes and the careful attention to her appearance became armor against the isolation, became way of maintaining identity and dignity when she had no one to see her or care how she looked, became small daily ritual that gave structure to existence that otherwise threatened to dissolve into meaningless repetition of hunting and hiding and waiting. She watched Jasper through her visions with obsessive attention that intensified as the years brought them closer to their destined meeting, seeing his life in the Southern Vampire Wars with Maria and the endless cycle of violence and death that defined his existence through the 1920s and 30s and into the early 1940s. She saw Maria, the beautiful, calculating vampire, who had created Jasper during the Civil War, and then immediately weaponized his empathic gift, forcing him to train and manage the newborn armies she created and deployed in her territorial conflicts with other vampires competing for hunting grounds and dominance across Texas and Mexico. Maria had recognized Jasper's potential immediately upon his transformation, had understood that his ability to feel and manipulate emotions made him perfect instrument for controlling the volatile, dangerous newborns who possessed superior strength for their first year, but lacked any discipline or strategic thinking or capacity to work together effectively. She saw how Maria used Jasper's ability to manipulate the emotions of the newborns, keeping them controlled enough to train but aggressive enough to fight effectively when deployed against rival armies. How she relied on him to identify when individual newborns had lost their initial supernatural strength after their first year and needed to be destroyed and replaced with fresh fighters who would be more effective in combat. The efficiency of the system was undeniable from Maria's perspective, but the cost to Jasper was incalculable, his gift forcing him to experience the emotional reality of every vampire he created and trained and eventually destroyed, feeling their confusion and terror and betrayal as if these emotions were his own, drowning in accumulated suffering that would have destroyed anyone less resilient or less cursed with the capacity to survive what should have been psychologically unsurvivable. The horror of what Jasper was forced to do would have been overwhelming for any vampire, but for someone with his particular gift, it was torture beyond normal comprehension. His empathic ability forcing him to feel the fear and pain and betrayal of every newborn he killed, experiencing their deaths from inside their emotional perspective, while simultaneously carrying out the executions that Maria required. He felt their confusion and terror, felt their desperate attempts to understand why the vampire who had trained them and led them and seemed to care about their survival was now destroying them, felt their final moments of consciousness as if he were dying himself over and over and over again across decades of systematic slaughter. Alice watched him drowning in other suffering, watched the accumulated trauma crushing him under weight that would have broken anyone less strong or less cursed with the ability to survive what should have killed him emotionally, if not physically. She saw the rare moments of brightness in his existence, his friendship with Peter, who was newborn soldier-like, himself before surviving long enough past his first year to develop some personality beyond simple violence and aggression. The careful alliance they formed within Maria's army as they tried to protect each other and maintain some humanity despite the horror surrounding them constantly. She saw Peter's decision to save Charlotte, a newborn female he had fallen in love with, despite Maria's prohibition on such attachments that might interfere with the army's effectiveness and discipline. Saw Jasper helping them escape even though it meant incurring Maria's fury and punishment. Saw his willingness to sacrifice his own safety for his friend's happiness, even when he could not imagine ever achieving similar happiness himself, or believing he deserved such reward after everything he had done. The 1940s brought subtle shifts in Jasper's situation, Peter and Charlotte eventually returning to help him leave Maria, and the wars that had consumed 6 decades of his immortal existence. His decision to abandon the only life he had known since his transformation, coming from exhaustion and despair rather than hope for anything better. He left with Peter and Charlotte and wandered with them for a while. the three of them moving north away from the territorial conflicts that still consumed the southern vampire population, trying to discover whether existence could contain something besides endless violence and suffering, and the mechanical repetition of actions that served purposes he had long stopped believing in or caring about. But Jasper could not escape what he had done or what he had felt, could not outrun the accumulated trauma of 60 years spent drowning in death and suffering, could not find peace or purpose or any reason to continue existing beyond simple inability to make himself stop. Peter and Charlotte tried to help him, tried to show him that freedom from Maria meant freedom to choose different kind of existence, but they could not reach the place inside him where the damage lived, could not alleviate suffering that came not from external circumstances, but from internal reality of having felt thousands of deaths as if they were his own, of carrying guilt and grief for atrocities he had committed, even though he had been victim himself of Maria's manipulation and control. Alice watched him sink deeper into depression through the mid-1940s, saw him questioning whether his existence had any value or meaning, saw him considering whether he should simply walk into the sun or provoke stronger vampires into destroying him, saw him barely held to life by Peter and Charlotte's concern and by the simple momentum of having existed this long already. She wanted desperately to reach him, to show him the visions of their shared future, to give him reason to hold on just a little longer, but the timing was not yet right, the pieces not yet properly aligned, her visions showing clearly that meeting him before the appointed moment would disrupt the careful sequence of events that needed to unfold exactly as she had foreseen them. She had to watch him suffer and be unable to help, had to trust that the timeline would bring them together when it was supposed to, even though every instinct screamed at her to find him immediately and save him from the despair that threatened to consume him entirely. The diner appeared in her visions with increasing clarity and frequency as 1948 approached, the specific location in Philadelphia crystallizing along with the exact date and even the approximate time when Jasper would walk through the door exhausted and hopeless and searching without knowing what he was searching for. She saw herself already there waiting, saw her greeting that would shock him with its familiarity and its confidence, saw the vision she would show him of their future together that would give him the first real hope he had felt in decades. She traveled to Philadelphia weeks early, positioning herself perfectly, watching the approach of the moment that would change both their existences and end her 28 years of isolation, and give Jasper his first glimpse of the possibility that immortal life could contain something besides suffering. The diner was small and unremarkable, the kind of establishment that served simple food to working people and travelers, the kind of place where a young woman sitting alone nursing coffee for hours would draw minimal attention from staff too busy to care about one quiet customer who caused no problems and tipped adequately. Alice positioned herself at a booth with clear view of the entrance, her visions showing her exactly when Jasper would arrive, counting down the minutes and then the seconds until the door would open and everything she had waited for and prepared for across nearly 3 decades would finally begin. He entered exactly when her visions had shown he would, looking exhausted despite vampires being incapable of true physical fatigue. His shoulders curved inward as if carrying visible weight, his scarred skin testament to decades of violence, and his golden eyes marking him as someone who had adopted the alternative lifestyle, though probably only recently, given how much pain still showed in his expression and his bearing and his entire presence. He radiated depression so profound that the other customers unconsciously moved away from him, his empathic gift apparently leaking his emotional state outward and affecting everyone in proximity. The diner's atmosphere growing heavy and sad as he stood in the doorway looking around without clear purpose or direction. A vampire who had come inside simply because he had nowhere else to go and no particular reason to be anywhere at all. Alice smiled at him with absolute confidence and joy, with certainty that probably seemed insane given that they had never met, with a kind of welcome someone might give to a beloved friend or partner returning from long absence. She spoke clearly, despite the distance between them, her voice carrying across the diner with precise calculation. "You've kept me waiting a long time," she said, the words exactly as she had seen herself saying them 1,000 times in visions across the years. The greeting that would shock him and intrigue him and give him reason to approach rather than flee from the strange vampire who somehow knew him despite their mutual status as complete strangers. Jasper froze in the doorway, his gift allowing him to feel her genuine joy and affection and absolute lack of fear or hostility, his confusion warring with desperate hope that perhaps this unexpected encounter meant something, that perhaps his existence was not quite as meaningless and purposeless as he had believed. He approached her booth cautiously, sitting across from her with visible wariness that could not quite suppress the hope he was trying not to feel, trying not to trust, trying not to let himself believe might be real. Alice reached across the table and took his scarred hand without hesitation or revulsion, her touch gentle and her expression radiating love and certainty that made no sense given the circumstances, but felt absolutely genuine to his empathic perception. She explained her gift carefully, showing him through words, and then through demonstrated knowledge that she could see the future, that she had been watching him for years through her visions, that she knew what he had endured and what he was feeling, and that none of it made him monster or irredeemable despite what he believed about himself. She told him about the Cullens, the family they would join together, the lifestyle of compassion and control that Carlyle had pioneered, and that they would learn together, the possibility that immortal existence could contain happiness and purpose and belonging rather than simply endless repetition of suffering and violence and meaningless continuation. She showed him the vision that mattered most, opening her gift to him as fully as she could, letting him see through her perception the future they would share, the decades and centuries of partnership and love and mutual support, the family that would accept them both and give them place to belong and reason to continue existing. She showed him moments from their shared life, specific instances of joy and peace and simple contentment that seemed impossible to him given everything he knew about himself and his nature and his history. Jasper felt through his empathic ability that she was telling absolute truth as she understood it, that her certainty was genuine and her affection was real, and her confidence in their shared future was unshakable. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he allowed himself to hope that perhaps his existence might contain something besides pain and regret, and the accumulated weight of all the death he had caused and felt. They left the diner together and began the 2-year journey toward the Cullens. Jasper needing time to adjust to the animal diet and to develop sufficient control to be around the family safely. Alice patient and supportive and absolutely certain that every difficulty was temporary and every struggle was worthwhile, because she had already seen where they were going and knew that everything would ultimately work out exactly as it needed to. She taught him to hunt animals through demonstration and encouragement, understanding that his transition would be harder than hers had been because of his decades of human blood consumption and because of his empathic gift that made him feel the fear of his prey in ways that complicated feeding regardless of what he was hunting. Those 2 years of preparation were the happiest either of them had known in their immortal existences. The simple joy of companionship and understanding and shared purpose, making every difficulty manageable, every setback temporary, every moment precious despite the challenges they faced. Jasper learned to trust Alice's visions and her certainty, learned to believe that perhaps he was not beyond redemption or unworthy of happiness, learned that someone could know everything he had done and still love him without reservation or condition. Alice finally had the partnership she had seen and waited for across 28 years of isolation. Finally had someone who understood her gift and valued her presence and loved her exactly as she was. Finally had reason to believe that her patient waiting had been worthwhile and that the future she had foreseen was real and approaching with inevitable certainty. The Cullen family in 1950 lived in a location that Alice's visions had shown her with perfect clarity. A house situated in countryside that allowed privacy and seclusion while remaining close enough to human civilization that Carlyle could maintain his medical practice and the family could practice the careful integration with human society that characterized their unusual lifestyle. Alice and Jasper arrived on a cool evening in early spring, having spent 2 years preparing for this moment. Jasper's control still precarious, but sufficient for the introduction Alice had foreseen would go smoothly, despite his nervousness and his lingering doubts about whether he deserved the acceptance and belonging she had promised him so confidently. Carlyle greeted them at the door before they could knock, his expression warm and welcoming in ways that suggested Alice's vision of their arrival had been accurate in every detail, his golden eyes kind, and his manner radiating the genuine compassion that had allowed him to build a family of rescued vampires who shared his commitment to protecting human life rather than preying upon it. He spoke to them as if they were expected guests rather than strangers appearing without invitation or warning. His courtesy and warmth immediate and apparently effortless. His acceptance of their presence absolute despite having no prior knowledge of who they were or why they had come to his home. Alice felt relief flood through her at his welcome, the moment unfolding exactly as she had seen it across years of visions. The family she had waited for finally becoming real, rather than simply possible future she had trusted, would materialize when the timing was right. She introduced herself and Jasper with confidence born from knowing how this conversation would progress, explaining her gift and how it had shown her this family and this lifestyle and this specific moment when they would join the Cullens and become part of something larger than their individual existences. Edward appeared next, the bronze-haired vampire she had seen in her visions, who possessed the gift of reading minds, his expression fascinated as he attempted to access her thoughts and found them obscured by the constant flow of visions that created static in her consciousness, futures branching and shifting so rapidly that he could not isolate present thoughts from the noise of possible tomorrows. He circled her mentally with obvious curiosity, intrigued by a mind that resisted his gift not through natural immunity like Bella would possess decades later, but through sheer complexity and constant motion that made her thoughts impossible to pin down or read clearly. Alice smiled at his frustration and his interest, understanding that they would become close despite, or perhaps because of his inability to know her mind completely, that their gifts would create bond between them as the two most overtly supernatural members of the family. Esme emerged from deeper in the house with maternal warmth that enveloped Alice like physical embrace, her love and acceptance immediate and unconditional in ways that made something ache in Alice's chest, some echo of human need for mother that her amnesia could not quite erase, even though she remembered nothing of her own human family or childhood. Esme welcomed them both with genuine joy, treating them as children returning home rather than strangers seeking shelter, her capacity for love apparently infinite, and her happiness at the family's expansion obvious in every word and gesture. She fussed over them gently, asking about their journey and whether they needed anything, her attention making Alice feel seen and valued and cared for in ways she had not experienced since her awakening 28 years earlier. Rosalie's appearance carried more complexity. The stunningly beautiful blonde vampire whose resentment and suspicion were immediately apparent despite her attempt at courtesy, her golden eyes assessing Alice with calculation that suggested she viewed another female as potential threat or competition rather than sister. Alice understood through her visions that Rosalie's hostility would eventually transform into acceptance and even affection, that patience and consistent non-threatening behavior would win her over gradually, that the beautiful bitter vampire needed time to understand that Alice had no interest in competing for attention or status within the family hierarchy. She smiled at Rosalie with genuine warmth despite the coldness she received in return, confident that the future she had seen would eventually manifest, even if the present moment felt tense and unwelcoming from this particular family member. Emmett provided immediate contrast to his mate's suspicion. The massive, jovial vampire greeting Alice and Jasper with easy acceptance that required no explanation or justification. His personality apparently incapable of holding grudges or maintaining suspicion when simpler emotions like amusement and friendliness were available. He clapped Jasper on the shoulder with strength that would have shattered human bones, welcoming him as brother without hesitation or concern about the scars that marked decades of violence, his laughter filling the house with warmth that helped dissipate some of the tension Jasper carried in every line of his body. Alice liked him immediately and completely, understanding that Emmett would be source of lightness and humor in the family, that his refusal to take anything too seriously would balance the intensity and brooding that characterized some of the others. The integration into the family proceeded with challenges that Alice had foreseen and prepared for, understanding that knowing difficulties were coming did not necessarily make them easier to navigate, but at least prevented them from being surprising or devastating. Jasper's struggle with the lifestyle was immediate and constant, his decades of human blood consumption making animal blood seem inadequate and unsatisfying his empathic gift making him feel the fear and pain of his prey, regardless of whether he was hunting humans or animals, his control fragile in ways that required constant vigilance and Alice's careful management to prevent catastrophic mistakes. She used her visions to prevent his slip-ups before they occurred, seeing moments of weakness approaching and steering him away from situations where his control would fail, watching the branching futures constantly to identify the paths that led to success rather than disaster. She saw when he needed to hunt before the thirst became overwhelming, saw when they needed to avoid town because his control was too precarious that particular day, saw which routes home from school would expose him to too many human scents and which alternatives would keep him safe from temptation he could not yet reliably resist. Her gift became his safety net, catching him before he fell, guiding him through the difficult transition with patience and certainty that eventually his control would improve and the constant vigilance would become less necessary. Edward and Alice formed sibling bond with surprising speed. Their shared status as the overtly gifted members of the family creating connection that transcended the usual dynamics of vampire covens. They could communicate in ways the others could not fully participate in or understand, Edward reading her present thoughts when they emerged briefly from the static of visions, Alice showing him futures she saw that concerned him or amused her or seemed important for him to understand. They developed shorthand and private jokes, understanding each other's isolation as supernatural even among supernatural creatures, recognizing that their gifts set them apart in ways that created both power and loneliness in equal measure. Rosalie's eventual acceptance came gradually across months and years. Alice's consistent non-threatening behavior and her obvious devotion to Jasper, rather than interest in competing for Emmett or anyone else's attention, slowly eroding the beautiful vampire's initial hostility and suspicion. Alice never confronted Rosalie's coldness directly, never demanded acceptance or complained about being treated poorly, simply maintained patient friendliness and gave Rosalie space to come around in her own time, trusting her visions that showed eventual sisterhood, even when present reality suggested such outcome was impossible. She understood that Rosalie's bitterness came from her own trauma and loss, that her beauty had been curse rather than blessing in her human life, that she resented what she had become and what she had lost, and sometimes took that resentment out on others who seemed happy with vampire existence. She would have traded away without hesitation for chance at normal human life. Emmett and Alice's dynamic was playful from the beginning. His humor finding willing audience in her optimism and lightness, their interactions characterized by teasing and laughter that helped balance the household's more serious members. He appreciated her gifts' practical applications, enjoying how she could predict the outcomes of their various competitions and bets, using her visions to plan elaborate pranks that required perfect timing to execute successfully. She used her gift to surprise him occasionally, showing him futures where his plans failed spectacularly, helping him avoid embarrassment or actual danger from schemes that seemed amusing in theory, but would lead to disaster in practice. Carlyle and Esme's parental pride in Alice manifested differently than their relationships with their other adopted children. Their joy in her optimism and her gifts' positive applications apparent in how they relied on her visions to keep the family safe and undetected. Carlyle, valued her ability to foresee problems before they developed, using her gift to identify situations where his work at the hospital might expose their nature, or where the family's presence in a community was becoming noticed in ways that would require relocation. Esme loved Alice's enthusiasm and her fashion sense, her interest in making their various houses into homes, her ability to find joy in small things despite her tragic past, and her difficult solitary years before finding the family. Taking the Cullen name officially felt like claiming identity she had chosen, rather than simply accepting one assigned by circumstance or biology. Alice Cullen emerging as complete person in ways that Alice with no surname had never quite achieved. She belonged now, had family and purpose and place in world that extended beyond simple survival or waiting for predetermined future to materialize. The decades of peace that followed their integration were exactly as she'd foreseen them. The family moving periodically to avoid drawing attention to their lack of aging, enrolling in high school repeatedly as their preferred method of maintaining human contact and normalcy, Carlisle practicing medicine, and Esme renovating houses, and the younger vampires navigating the strange experience of being eternal teenagers pretending to be temporary ones. Alice developed her role as the family's social coordinator and fashion consultant, using her visions to ensure they dressed appropriately for each new era and location, planning their movements to avoid supernatural encounters that might prove dangerous or complicated. Her optimism became touchstone for the others. Her certainty that everything would work out, providing comfort when situations seemed difficult or uncertain. Her gift allowing her to promise with complete confidence that problems were temporary and solutions were coming even when present circumstances suggested otherwise. She became the heart of the family in ways that complemented Carlisle's role as moral compass and Esme's position as emotional center. Her presence making everyone's existence brighter and more purposeful and more connected to possibilities rather than simply reactions to circumstances. Her relationship with Jasper deepened across the decades into partnership that transcended simple romantic love, their bond becoming foundation that supported both of them through difficulties and amplified joys they experienced together. She balanced his melancholy with her optimism, her visions showing him futures worth working toward when his past threatened to overwhelm him with guilt and grief. He grounded her in present moment when her gift threatened to pull her completely into future possibilities, his emotional manipulation helping her stay connected to current reality rather than living entirely in visions of what might be. They compensated for each other's weaknesses perfectly, her foresight preventing situations where his control might fail, his empathic ability helping her recognize when her optimism was becoming denial rather than hope, their love growing deeper and more essential with every passing year. The family understood them as inseparable unit, never inviting one without the other, never expecting either to make decisions independently of their partnership, recognizing that Alice and Jasper functioned as single entity in ways that even mated vampires did not always achieve. They shared room in every house, shared their private world of visions and emotions that others could observe but not fully enter, shared the understanding that they had saved each other in ways that created debt that could never be repaid, an obligation that neither wanted to escape. Alice knew Jasper's moods and needs before he articulated them. Jasper felt Alice's emotions and adjusted the household's atmosphere to support whatever she required, their supernatural gifts creating intimacy and understanding that went beyond normal relationship dynamics into something that felt almost like shared consciousness. The decades before Bella's arrival passed in relative peace, the family building life together that felt sustainable and meaningful, accumulating experiences and memories that made immortal existence feel less like endless repetition and more like actual life with progression and development and accumulated significance. Alice watched futures constantly, seeing the branching possibilities ahead, noting the approaching moment when everything would change, when a human girl would arrive in Forks and transform their existence in ways both wonderful and terrifying, when the family she had found and built would face challenges that would test every bond and every commitment they had made to each other, and to Carlyle's vision of compassionate vampire existence. The vision of Bella Swan came to Alice in early 2005 with clarity that suggested profound significance, showing her a human girl with brown hair and brown eyes who would arrive in Forks and transform everything the Cullen family had built across decades of careful peace and stability. Alice saw two distinct futures branching from Bella's arrival. One where the girl died quickly and violently, and the family's existence continued unchanged. Another where Bella survived and became vampire herself, and joined the family as sister and friend and permanent fixture in their immortal lives. The second future glowed with warmth and joy and deep connection that made Alice's heart ache with longing for this person she had never met but already loved with intensity that seemed irrational given Bella existed only as possibility rather than present reality. She saw Bella as vampire in vivid detail, saw her with golden eyes and pale skin, and the particular grace that characterized their kind. Saw her standing beside Edward with obvious love and devotion. Saw her integrated into the family, as if she'd always belonged there. Saw decades and centuries of sisterhood and friendship that made Alice desperately want this future to manifest, rather than the alternative timeline where Bella died and the family never knew what they had lost. The vision showed her specific moments from their shared future, shopping trips and conversations and quiet companionship, the kind of female friendship Alice had never experienced in either of her lives. The sister she had lost to amnesia replaced by sister she would choose and keep forever. She told Edward what she had seen, showing him the visions of this human girl who would be his mate and his eternal companion. Watching his face cycle through horror and denial and reluctant fascination as he processed the implications of Alice's gift, showing him a future he had never imagined and was not certain he wanted. Edward's resistance was immediate and absolute, his self-loathing making him reject the idea that he could or should have relationship with human girl. His conviction that he was monster and danger making him determined to avoid Bella entirely rather than risk harming her or dragging her into the darkness he believed characterized his existence. He argued with Alice's visions, insisted that just because she saw something did not make it inevitable, that he possessed free will and could choose different path than the one her gift suggested was approaching. Alice listened patiently to his protests and his reasoning, understanding that he needed to work through his resistance in his own time, trusting that the future she had seen would eventually manifest, despite his current determination to avoid it. She had learned across decades of using her gift that fighting against visions that appeared with this level of clarity and consistency rarely succeeded, that the futures she saw most vividly tended to manifest regardless of attempts to prevent them, that her role was not to force outcomes, but to help guide everyone toward the best possible versions of inevitable events. She remained confident that Edward would eventually accept what she already knew, that Bella was his destiny, and fighting the truth would only make everyone's journey more difficult and painful. The family meeting about Bella's impending arrival was tense and complicated. Carlyle concerned about the risks of having humans so closely connected to their family. Esme worried about both Edward's happiness and the girl's safety. Rosalie immediately hostile to the idea of involving human in their carefully constructed existence. Emmett amused by the drama and curious about how things would play out. Jasper wary of situations he could not control through his gift. Alice remained adamant that Bella would become part of their family, that the future where she survived and joined them was not only possible but likely, that fighting against this outcome would cause more problems than accepting it, and working to ensure the best possible timeline manifested. She explained what she had seen with passionate conviction, describing the Bella who would become Vampire's sister, an essential member of their household, painting picture a future so vivid and so desirable that even Rosalie's objections seemed to soften slightly under the weight of Alice's absolute certainty. Bella arrived in Forks in January of 2005 to live with her father Charlie Swan after her mother remarried, the human girl bringing with her the futures Alice had foreseen and the complications that would test every member of the family in ways they had not been tested in decades of peaceful existence. Alice watched through her visions as Edward encountered Bella's scent in biology class on her first day, saw the moment when his control nearly shattered completely, saw him gripping the table with enough force to crack the wood while fighting the overwhelming urge to slaughter everyone in the classroom to get to the girl whose blood called to him with intensity he had never experienced in 80 years of vampire existence. She saw every muscle in his body tensing for attack, saw the branching futures where he gave in to the bloodlust and where he managed to resist, saw the fragile thread of his control holding by mere force of will and decades of practice. She saw his decision forming in real time through her visions, saw him choosing to leave Forks rather than risk Bella's life, saw him fleeing to Alaska to stay with the Denali Coven, while he decided whether he could safely return or whether protecting Bella required permanent separation. Alice felt relief when he chose flight over massacre, understanding that this decision gave them time to plan and prepare and figure out how to manage the situation without tragedy, that Edward's control had been sufficient in the crucial moment, even if barely, that the future where Bella survived remained viable despite this terrifyingly close call. She tracked his location through her visions while he was gone, watching him debate with himself about whether to return or stay away permanently, seeing the futures where he came back growing stronger and more likely with each passing day. His return after 2 weeks away surprised no one who understood Edward's nature, his curiosity and his loneliness and his desire for connection, overcoming his legitimate fears about the danger he represented to Bella. He came back determined to pursue friendship with the human girl despite the risks, convinced that he could manage his thirst through sheer will and careful planning, that knowing Bella was worth the constant vigilance and struggle that proximity to her would require. Alice watched the futures shift and solidify as Edward made this choice, saw the timeline where Bella became vampire growing stronger and more likely, saw her own friendship with this human girl approaching with increasing inevitability, saw the happiness and the complications and the danger that would characterize the months and years ahead. She orchestrated their first meeting carefully, catching Bella in the cafeteria with enthusiastic greeting that probably seemed insane given they had never spoken before, treating her like a beloved friend rather than stranger, her excitement and warmth overwhelming the confused human girl who had no context for why Edward's strange sister was suddenly acting like they were already close. Alice could not help her enthusiasm, could not moderate her affection to something more appropriate for first meeting. Her visions of their future sisterhood making Bella feel like family already, making restraint impossible even though she understood her behavior was probably frightening, or at minimum, deeply confusing to the human. She hugged Bella without invitation or warning, spoke to her with familiarity that suggested years of friendship rather than first conversation. Her joy at finally meeting in person the sister she had already known through visions bubbling over despite her attempts to seem somewhat normal and appropriate. Edward's exasperation with Alice's certainty about Bella was constant and vocal. His insistence that the future remained undecided warring with Alice's absolute confidence that Bella would become vampire and sister and permanent member of their family. He wanted to believe Bella could remain human and safe, wanted to think that he could have relationship with her without destroying her humanity or her life, wanted to resist a future Alice kept showing him, where Bella's transformation was inevitable consequence of their involvement, regardless of how carefully they tried to protect her mortality. They argued about it frequently. Edward's stubborn refusal to accept what Alice saw creating tension between siblings who usually agreed on most matters. His determination to preserve Bella's humanity clashing with Alice's visions that showed such preservation was ultimately impossible if Edward insisted on maintaining relationship with the human girl. Alice understood his resistance came from love and genuine concern for Bella's well-being, but she also knew from her visions that fighting the inevitable would only make the journey more painful for everyone involved. She tried to explain that the future where Bella became vampire was not tragedy but triumph, that Bella would be happy as immortal, that losing her humanity was not the devastating loss Edward imagined, but rather transformation into something stronger and more complete. But Edward could not hear this reassurance. His self-hatred and his romanticization of human mortality making him incapable of seeing vampire existence as anything except curse and darkness, making him determined to save Bella from fate that Alice already knew she would eventually choose willingly and without regret. The shopping trips began almost immediately, Alice using any excuse to spend time with Bella and begin building the friendship she had already seen flourishing in their shared future. She dragged Bella to Port Angeles and Seattle, buying her clothes and accessories that suited her better than the practical functional wardrobe the human girl preferred, teaching her about style and fashion and beauty in ways that Bella resisted half-heartedly, but also seemed to appreciate despite her protests. These excursions served multiple purposes beyond simple shopping, allowing Alice to protect Bella from dangers her visions showed approaching, giving them time to bond away from Edward's overprotective hovering, letting Alice express her affection through the gift-giving and attention that came naturally to her, and that Bella seemed unused to receiving from anyone. She told Bella about the family's history in carefully edited versions that revealed their nature without overwhelming her, explaining about Carlisle's compassion and Esme's warmth, and each sibling's personality and role within their unusual household. Bella listened with fascination and acceptance that seemed remarkable, given how most humans would react to discovering their classmates were actually vampires. Her lack of fear or revulsion endearing her to Alice even more completely. Her genuine interest in understanding rather than judging, making it clear why Edward had fallen so thoroughly in love with this particular human girl. Alice found herself opening up in ways she rarely did, sharing details about her visions and her limitations, talking about Jasper and their partnership, treating Bella like confident and trusted friend, despite the brevity of their acquaintance. The baseball game that Alice organized for a rare sunny day in late March served multiple purposes, giving the family chance to play their favorite sport with the enthusiasm and speed that was only possible when no humans were present to witness their supernatural abilities, providing entertainment and bonding time that they all valued, creating opportunity for Bella to see them in their element and understand more fully what they were and what they were capable of doing. Alice saw the storm approaching that would provide perfect cover for the thunder of their playing, saw Bella's wonder and slight fear as she watched them move with impossible speed and strength, saw the futures branching ahead with mix of possibility and danger that made her uneasy, even as she maintained her optimistic exterior for everyone else's benefit. She did not see the nomadic vampires approaching until they were nearly there. James and Victoria and Laurent appearing at the edge of the field, with timing that suggested they had heard the game from distance and come to investigate with curiosity rather than hostility. Alice's visions showed her the catastrophic moment approaching mere seconds before it occurred, saw the wind shifting and carrying Bella's scent directly to the visitors, saw James's expression transforming from polite curiosity to hunting focus as he caught the scent of human girl standing among vampires, recognized immediately that this particular vampire was Tracker, who would not give up prey once he had committed to the hunt, whose gift made him supernaturally good at finding and capturing targets he selected. The vision of James hunting Bella exploded across Alice's awareness with terrifying clarity, showing her the Tracker's strategies and his patience and his particular gift for finding prey no matter how well protected or hidden. She saw futures where James succeeded in killing Bella, saw the Tracker's satisfaction and Edward's devastation and the family's grief, saw timelines she desperately needed to prevent from manifesting. But she also saw paths where Bella survived, where the family's protection and Alice's visions combined to keep the human girl safe until James could be stopped permanently, where this crisis became turning point that brought Bella fully into their world, rather than driving her away from it. She focused on those survival futures immediately, searching for the decisions and actions that would lead to the outcome she needed, preparing to guide everyone toward the timeline where Bella lived and James died. The protection plan formed quickly. Edward and Emmett and Carlisle preparing to hunt James, while Alice and Jasper took Bella away from Forks to location the tracker could not easily find or access, distance and misdirection, buying time for the hunters to eliminate the threat before James could get to his prey. Alice drove Bella south toward Phoenix, with Jasper beside her, providing emotional calm that kept Bella from panicking. Despite the obvious danger, watching futures constantly for any sign of James's approach or strategy shift. Her visions showing her that the tracker was following Edward's scent, while Laurent provided information about the Cullen's abilities, and Victoria circled at safe distance, waiting to see how her mate's hunt would conclude. Phoenix should have been safe. The city large enough to hide in, and far enough from Forks that James would need days to track them there, even with his supernatural abilities. But Alice's visions went suddenly dark around Bella in ways that terrified her with their implications. She could not see what decision Bella was making or what action she was taking, could not perceive the future beyond the blankness that suggested rapid, unexpected choices that Alice's gift could not follow or predict quickly enough to provide warning or intervention. She realized too late that James had tricked Bella, had used her mother as bait in some way that Alice's visions had not shown her because the plan had formed and executed too quickly for her gift to catch and interpret, had exploited the blind spots that came from Bella's impulsive decisions made in emotional states that did not allow for advanced planning or rational consideration. The ballet studio was place from Bella's childhood, location James had learned about through research and manipulation, and the particular cunning that made him successful tracker across his immortal existence. Alice and Jasper arrived with Edward to find James already there with Bella, the tracker having tortured and taunted her while filming his actions for Edward's benefit, his cruelty going beyond simple hunting into sadistic pleasure at causing pain and suffering. They destroyed James quickly and efficiently once they arrived, Edward's rage and Jasper's combat experience and Emmett's strength combining to tear the tracker apart before he could do more damage, burning his remains to ensure he could never threaten anyone again. Alice, searching futures to confirm that Victoria had fled and would not return immediately to avenge her mate. But Bella had been bitten, James's venom pumping through her system and beginning the transformation that would change her from human to vampire in 3 days of burning agony. Alice saw Edward's decision forming even as she saw the future where Bella woke as newborn vampire, saw him choosing to save her humanity by sucking the venom from her wound before the transformation progressed beyond reversal, saw his desperate attempt to give Bella back the human life she would lose if she completed the change. Alice felt disappointment, even as she supported Edward's choice, understanding that Bella's transformation was merely delayed rather than prevented, that the future she had seen would still manifest eventually, even if not in this specific moment, that Edward was postponing the inevitable rather than actually changing the outcome permanently. The hospital aftermath was tense and complicated, Bella recovering from injuries that were explained as a result of falling downstairs and through window rather than vampire attack. Charlie, confused and frightened by how close he had come to losing his daughter. Edward consumed with guilt and determination to protect Bella better. The Cullen family relieved that the immediate crisis had passed, but aware that James's mate Victoria remained alive and would eventually seek revenge for her partner's destruction. Alice watched futures branching ahead and saw Victoria's plans forming slowly and carefully, saw the red-haired vampire's patience and cunning, saw danger approaching that would not manifest for months but would eventually bring more violence and more tests of the family's ability to protect the human girl who had become central to their existence despite every rational reason to keep distance. She planned Bella's prom as combination celebration and stress relief, needing the normalcy and joy of planning party after weeks of crisis and fear, using her gift to ensure every detail would be perfect and that Bella would enjoy the evening despite her protests about formal events and dancing and being center of attention. Alice bought Bella's dress and shoes and did her hair and makeup with meticulous attention to every detail, transforming the reluctant human into princess who looked like she belonged in Edward's arms, creating moments of beauty and normalcy and teenage romance that felt precious given how close they had come to losing any chance for such moments. She ignored Bella's half-hearted protests and complaints, understanding that the human girl would appreciate the effort, even if she would never admit it directly. That creating perfect evening was Alice's way of celebrating survival and affirming life after coming so close to death. The prom represented more than just party to Alice. It symbolized victory and survival and the preservation of the future she had seen, where Bella remained part of their family. It marked the end of immediate crisis and the beginning of calmer period where they could focus on building relationships rather than simply fighting to survive. She watched Edward and Bella dance with satisfaction and joy, seeing her visions manifesting in present reality, understanding that every step toward the future where Bella became vampire and sister brought them closer to the happiness and completion Alice knew was waiting for all of them if they could just navigate the challenges that remain between present and inevitable destination. Bella's 18th birthday in September of 2006 should have been celebration of survival and happiness, marking nearly a year since she had entered the Cullen family's life and transformed their existence in ways both wonderful and terrifying. Commemorating the fact that she had lived through James's hunt and recovered and remained part of their world despite every danger and complication her humanity created. Alice insisted on throwing a party despite Bella's protests and discomfort with being center of attention. Her visions showing her the evening unfolding perfectly with cake and presents, and family gathered to celebrate this human girl who had become so important to all of them. Decorating the Cullen house with meticulous attention to every detail, wrapping presents she had carefully selected based on her knowledge of Bella's tastes and interests and needs. She saw the party going well in her visions, saw Bella's reluctant enjoyment and Edward's happiness, and the family's pleasure at having reason to celebrate something normal and human and joyful after months of crisis and vigilance. What Alice did not see, what her gift could not show her because the decision happened too quickly and too spontaneously for visions to form and crystallize, was Jasper's attack when Bella got a paper cut opening one of the presents, the scent of fresh human blood triggering his newborn instincts despite decades of practice and control, his body moving toward Bella with hunting focus before conscious thought could intervene or Alice's visions could provide warning. Edward threw Bella backward to protect her from Jasper's lunge, the force of his defensive action sending her crashing into the table where glass and crystal shattered and cut her arm more severely, more blood spilling and making the situation exponentially worse. Jasper fighting against Emmett and Alice's restraint, while Edward positioned himself between his mate and his brother. Alice felt horror crash through her as she helped Emmett contain Jasper, felt his shame and self-hatred through their bond as he regained control and understood what he had nearly done, felt the futures shifting catastrophically as Edward's expression transformed from protective to cold and distant, and decided. She saw Edward's decision forming even in that moment of chaos and blood and shattered glass, saw him choosing to leave Bella to protect her from the dangers their family represented, saw the plan crystallizing in his mind to convince Bella they did not want her, so she would not follow or try to maintain contact, saw the futures branching toward timeline where Bella spent months in devastating depression, and the family fractured under the weight of Edward's choice, and Alice's own connection to her best friend was severed without warning or explanation. She tried to catch his eye, tried to communicate through expression that this was wrong path and wrong choice, but Edward was already committed to course of action he believed was necessary and noble and protective, despite being actually cruel and destructive, and based on flawed understanding of what Bella needed or wanted. The family's departure happened with brutal efficiency within days of the birthday disaster. Edward informing Bella that they were leaving Forks and that she could not come with them or maintain contact afterward, telling her the lies he believed would set her free, claiming he did not love her and that she had been nothing more than temporary distraction and that she did not belong in their world. Alice watched through her visions as Bella's heart broke, saw the immediate devastating impact of Edward's words, saw the human girl's world collapsing around her as she lost not just Edward, but the entire family she had come to love and depend on, saw the depression descending like heavy curtain that would dim Bella's existence for months. She wanted desperately to stay, to maintain contact with Bella despite Edward's wishes, to provide the friendship and support that would help Bella survive this abandonment with less damage and less suffering. But Edward forbade any contact, insisted that clean break was necessary for Bella's healing and her safety, argued that maintaining connection would only prolong her pain and prevented her from moving on to normal human life that did not include vampires or supernatural danger. The family sided with Edward despite their own grief at losing Bella, Carlisle and Esme respecting his judgment about what his mate needed, Rosalie pleased to have the human removed from their existence, Emmett and Jasper following Edward's lead, even though they recognized the decision was causing pain for everyone involved. Alice left Forks with her family and travelled to Denali, where the Cullen coven stayed with their cousins, while Edward recovered from his self-imposed separation, and the family adjusted to existence that no longer included daily concern about protecting fragile human from their nature. But Alice could not stop checking Bella's future obsessively, despite Edward's prohibition, could not resist using her gift to monitor the girl she considered sister, even though maintaining this surveillance meant defying Edward's explicit instructions about leaving Bella alone completely. What she saw terrified her. Bella sinking into depression so profound that she became nearly catatonic, her future dimming to almost nothing, her choices narrowing to simple mechanical survival without joy or hope or any indication that she would recover from Edward's abandonment. She watched through visions as Bella moved through her days like zombie, attending school and work without actually being present. Her consciousness turned inward to grief that consumed everything else. Her father Charlie, growing increasingly worried and helpless as his daughter faded before his eyes. Alice saw months passing with no improvement, saw Bella's 18th year becoming study in depression and loss, saw the human girl she loved suffering in ways that Alice's visions showed but could not alleviate, because Edward insisted that contact would only make things worse. The frustration of being able to see Bella's pain but not being allowed to help was torture for Alice, her gift showing her exactly how much damage Edward's choice was causing while simultaneously preventing her from intervening in ways that might have reduced that damage. Jasper's guilt during their exile was overwhelming and constant, his empathic gift making him feel responsible for the family's fracture and Bella's suffering. His self-hatred intensified by understanding that his loss of control had triggered Edward's decision to leave. Alice tried to comfort him and remind him that Edward's choice was Edward's responsibility rather than consequence Jasper should bear alone. But her partner could not forgive himself for the attack that had seemed to prove Edward's fears about the danger the family represented to Bella. They were both miserable in Denali, both grieving losses that felt unnecessary and preventable, both watching futures that might have been if Edward had chosen differently. The cliff diving incident in early March of 2007 came without warning, because Alice could not see the werewolves who were present at the scene, her gift going dark around Bella at the crucial moment when she jumped from the cliff into the churning ocean water below. What Alice saw was Bella jumping and then nothing. No vision of her surfacing or surviving, only blankness that suggested death, or at minimum, the kind of rapid unconscious decisions that happened too quickly for Alice's gift to track accurately. She assumed the worst, believed Bella had committed suicide by jumping from dangerous height into dangerous water. Her grief and horror absolute as she processed the idea that her best friend had died while Alice was too far away to help or intervene. She made the decision to go to Forks immediately, despite Edward's standing prohibition against contact, her need to see Bella's father and offer whatever comfort she could overriding her obedience to Edward's wishes, her grief making her reckless about defying the brother who had caused this situation through his stubborn insistence that leaving Bella was protective rather than destructive. She arrived in Forks and went directly to Charlie's house, preparing herself to face grieving father and offer inadequate condolences and support, her own grief threatening to overwhelm her composure and her ability to function despite decades of emotional control and practice at maintaining appearances. But Bella was alive, soaked and exhausted but breathing, having been rescued from the water by Jacob Black before drowning could claim her. Alice felt relief so profound, it was almost painful. Her joy at finding Bella alive warring with fury at Edward for creating situation that had brought them to this point, with frustration at her own gift's limitations that had made her misinterpret what she had seen. The reunion was complicated by Bella's anger and pain, the human girl's grief at being abandoned transforming into rage at seeing Alice appear as if the months of silence and absence meant nothing, as if friendship could simply resume without acknowledgement of the hurt that had been inflicted. Alice explained about the cliff diving vision and her belief that Bella had died, explained why she had come despite Edward's prohibition, explained that she had been checking Bella's future constantly despite being forbidden from making contact. She learned about Jacob and the werewolves, the shapeshifters, who explained why her visions went dark around Bella so frequently, understood finally why her gift had failed her at crucial moments when Bella most needed protection or guidance. The existence of the Quileute pack complicated everything, creating blind spots in Alice's perception that made it impossible to track Bella reliably when she was with Jacob, making Alice's gift far less useful as protective tool than it had been before Edward's departure. The Edward crisis erupted within hours of Alice's arrival in Forks, Rosalie calling Edward to inform him that Bella had died based on Alice's initial interpretation of the cliff vision. Edward's immediate decision to seek death from the Volturi in Italy because he could not imagine existing without Bella, even though he had been the one to leave her. Alice saw his plan forming through her visions with horrifying clarity, saw him travelling to Volterra to provoke the Volturi into executing him for exposing their nature to humans, saw the ancient vampire royalty who enforced the laws of their kind preparing to grant his wish for death unless someone intervened to stop him. She made the split-second decision to save Edward despite her anger at him, despite understanding that this choice would bring the Volturi's attention down on their family in ways that would create future complications and dangers, despite knowing that Edward's dramatic gesture was selfish and cruel, given that Bella was actually alive and suffering from his abandonment. She could not let her brother die regardless of how furious she was with him, could not allow the family to fracture further through his destruction, could not face Carlyle and Esme and explain that she had seen Edward's death approaching and chosen not to prevent it. Taking Bella to Italy was calculated risk. Alice's visions showing that Bella's presence was necessary to stop Edward from his suicidal plan, but also showing that bringing human directly to the Volturi would expose them all to danger and scrutiny. They raced through Volterra during the St. Marcus Day festival, the city crowded with tourists celebrating the vampire hunting saint without knowing that actual vampires live beneath their feet in ancient chambers, arriving just in time to stop Edward from stepping into sunlight and revealing his sparkling skin to the crowd that would certainly report what they had seen. But the Volturi guards captured them immediately and brought them before Aro and his brothers, the ancient rulers of the vampire world, whose interest in the Cullen family's unusual lifestyle and gifts had been growing for centuries. Aro touched Alice's hand and experienced her visions directly through his own gift of absorbing thoughts and memories and abilities through physical contact. His fascination with her power to see futures immediate and intense and deeply threatening in its implications. He saw through her gift the timeline where Bella became vampire, saw proof that the Cullens intended to transform the human who knew too much about their world, saw the future Alice had been tracking for nearly 2 years where Bella survived and joined the family permanently. The Volturi allowed them to leave only because Alice's vision provided evidence that Bella's transformation would occur eventually, that the human would not remain human, and therefore would not remain security risk, who might expose vampire existence to the broader human world. But Aro's interest in Alice's gift and Edward's gift remained clear and threatening. His implication that he would welcome them into the Volturi Guard obvious, despite his surface courtesy and his allowance of their departure. They returned to Forks with Edward saved, but the family now firmly on the Volturi's radar in ways that would create complications and dangers Alice could see approaching in multiple possible futures. The reunion between Edward and Bella should have been joyful, but was complicated by months of pain, and Edward's continued resistance to the future Alice knew was inevitable. His insistence that Bella remain human, despite the Volturi's implicit requirement that she be transformed. His romantic delusions about mortality and humanity preventing him from seeing that Bella's humanity was a temporary state that would and should end with her transformation into vampire, who could stand beside him as equal rather than fragile creature requiring constant protection. Alice watched the futures shifting and solidifying, saw Bella's transformation approaching with increasing certainty, saw the families return to Forks and the resumption of their life together, with Bella included rather than excluded, saw hope finally for the future she had envisioned years earlier when the human girl first appeared in her visions as sister and friend and permanent member of their supernatural family. The spring of 2007 brought new dangers that Alice's visions revealed with increasing clarity and urgency, showing her Victoria creating an army of newborn vampires in Seattle with the specific purpose of destroying Bella to avenge James's death from the previous year. The red-haired vampire had been patient and calculating during her months of planning, learning from James's failure and understanding that attacking the Cullens directly required overwhelming force that only newborn numbers and strength could provide, gathering vulnerable humans from Seattle streets and transforming them into weapons she would deploy against the family that had destroyed her mate. Alice's visions of Victoria were frustratingly difficult to track because the vampire's decisions changed constantly and erratically, her mind jumping between possibilities so quickly that Alice's gift could not establish a clear picture of her plans or her timeline, showing only fragments and glimpses that suggested danger approaching without providing specific actionable intelligence about when or how the attack would come. She saw the newborns being created one by one across weeks and months, saw Victoria building her army with methodical patience that suggested she had learned caution from watching James die, saw the red-haired vampire staying carefully distant from her creations to avoid being tracked or identified as their creator by the Cullens or by the Volturi, whose laws strictly prohibited the kind of newborn army Victoria was assembling. The family prepared for war with grim determination, understanding that the threat was real and immediate and directed specifically at Bella, that Victoria's revenge would not be satisfied until the human girl who had survived James was destroyed along with anyone who tried to protect her. Alice's visions showed multiple possible outcomes for the coming confrontation. Futures where the Cullens won decisively, and futures where some of them were destroyed. Timelines that branched and shifted with every decision and every preparation they made. The uncertainty making her more anxious than she typically allowed herself to feel, given her usual confidence in her ability to see and navigate toward preferred outcomes. The additional complication of the werewolf pack created massive blind spot in Alice's tactical planning. her inability to see the shapeshifters or anything directly connected to them, meaning that she could not track Bella whenever she was with Jacob Black, could not perceive futures that involved the Quileute wolves, even though they were key players in the coming battle and essential allies despite the ancient enmity between their species. She had to coordinate with creatures she could not see, plan around variables she could not track, trust in outcomes she could not verify through her gift. The experience frustrating and frightening in ways that reminded her uncomfortably of her limitations and her dependence on her visions for sense of control and certainty. The alliance between the Cullens and the werewolf pack was unprecedented and uncomfortable for everyone involved. Decades or centuries of instinctive hatred and territorial conflict being set aside temporarily because both groups wanted to protect Bella and both recognized that Victoria's newborn army represented threat to the entire region that required cooperation rather than competition. Alice could not see the wolves during their joint planning sessions, could not perceive their reactions or their strategies, had to rely on Edward's mind reading to understand what the shapeshifters were thinking and feeling. The second-hand information, inadequate substitute for her usual direct perception of futures and possibilities. Jasper took charge of training both vampires and werewolves in newborn combat tactics, his experience in the Southern Vampire Wars making him uniquely qualified to teach strategies for fighting opponents who possessed superior strength but lacked experience in discipline and coordination. Alice watched him step into leadership role with mix of pride and concern, understanding that this situation was triggering memories of his time with Maria and the endless newborn armies he had created and trained and destroyed, that helping prepare for this battle was forcing him to confront trauma he had spent decades trying to escape and forget. She supported him quietly through the training sessions, her presence and her love providing anchor that kept him grounded in present rather than lost in terrible past. The training session, where Jasper demonstrated newborn fighting techniques to the combined force of Cullens and wolves, was tense and strange. Natural enemies working together with obvious discomfort and barely suppressed hostility, the treaty between them holding only because Bella's safety depended on their cooperation. Alice watched futures branching during the training, seeing possible conflicts between pack and family that she worked carefully to prevent, steering conversations away from topics that would trigger fights, suggesting breaks when tensions rose too high, using her gift to maintain fragile peace that was essential for their survival in the coming battle. Edward's proposal to Bella came during this period of preparation and danger. His decision to offer marriage before agreeing to transform her representing compromise between his desire to keep her human and her determination to become vampire. His romantic notions about marriage and traditional progression of relationships creating condition that Bella accepted with reluctance but also genuine happiness. Alice saw the proposal in her visions before it happened, saw Bella's mixed feelings about marriage and her ultimate agreement, saw the timeline suddenly flowering with possibility of wedding that Alice could plan and orchestrate and transform into perfect celebration despite the danger and the war approaching. She began planning the wedding immediately, even though the battle had to be survived first, using the project as a way to manage her anxiety about the coming confrontation and as expression of her joy that Bella would finally officially become family member, rather than simply Edward's human girlfriend. The wedding planning became obsession, an outlet and labor of love. Alice's visions showing her exactly how every detail should be arranged to create perfect day. Her determination absolute that Bella would have beautiful, memorable ceremony regardless of her protests. That she wanted something small and simple and private. Alice ignored these protests with cheerful stubbornness, understanding that Bella would appreciate the effort even if she claimed otherwise. That creating perfect wedding was Alice's way of celebrating Bella's survival and transformation and permanent integration into the family. Victoria's newborn army grew larger through April and May. Alice's visions showing her 20 or more young vampires being created and trained in basic combat, though not with anything approaching Jasper's expertise or Maria's systematic approach. Victoria apparently planning to overwhelm the Cullens through sheer numbers, rather than through superior tactics or coordination. The Seattle area was experiencing unprecedented string of disappearances and murders that human authorities were struggling to explain or address. The newborns feeding without restraint or caution, their violence drawing attention that would eventually bring the Volturi to investigate if the situation continued much longer without resolution. Alice's visions of the battlefield crystallized as June approached, showing her the clearing where the confrontation would occur, the snowy meadow in the mountains above Forks, where the newborns would arrive expecting to find Bella, and instead finding prepared force of vampires and werewolves ready to destroy them. She saw the Cullen strategy of hiding Bella away from the battlefield, with Edward protecting her, while the rest of the family fought alongside the wolves. Saw Victoria's plan being disrupted by encountering resistance she had not anticipated or prepared for. Saw futures where the Cullens and the pack won decisively, though not without risk, and not without several close calls that could have resulted in casualties on their side. The decision about where to position herself during the battle was difficult for Alice, her visions showing that staying with Bella to provide protection and early warning about approaching threats was strategically important, but also meant she could not participate in the actual fighting, could not use her speed and strength to help destroy the newborns, could not be present to support Jasper during combat that would inevitably trigger his trauma about the Southern Wars. She chose to stay with Bella ultimately, understanding that her gift was most valuable as defensive tool rather than offensive weapon, that seeing threats approaching gave them advantage that was more important than adding one more fighter to the battle. The night before the confrontation was tense and strange, the family preparing for war while also trying to maintain normal appearances for Bella's sake. Alice using her visions to reassure everyone that they would survive even though the futures showed danger and close calls that made her own confidence somewhat fragile and forced. She saw Bella and Edward spending the night together in the mountain tent, saw the cold and the difficulty and the intimacy of that final night before battle, saw Jacob's presence there creating tension and complication that Alice could not fully perceive because of her blind spot around the wolves. The battle itself unfolded largely as Alice had foreseen. The newborn army arriving at the clearing to find the Cullens and the wolf pack, waiting in coordinated formation. The fighting brutal and efficient as experienced vampires and supernatural wolves destroyed newborns, who had only strength without skill or strategy. Alice watched through her visions from her position with Bella, seeing the combat playing out in real time, while also tracking futures to identify threats that required warning or intervention. Her gift allowing her to call Edward when necessary to alert him about dangers approaching their position or problems developing on the battlefield that needed immediate attention. She saw Victoria and Riley approaching Edward and Bella's hiding place, saw the confrontation that would occur between Edward and the two older vampires who had created and directed the newborn army, saw the young wolves Seth and Leah arriving to help despite Edward's initial objection to their presence. The fight between Edward and Victoria happened beyond Alice's direct perception because of the wolves' involvement, her visions going frustratingly dark at the crucial moment, leaving her dependent on Edward's mental updates about the combat rather than her usual clear sight of outcomes and possibilities. The Volturi's arrival was not unexpected, but was still deeply concerning. Jane's guard appearing just as the battle concluded to investigate the illegal newborn army and determine who had created it and whether the Cullens had been involved in its creation or had simply been defending themselves from attack. Alice saw them approaching minutes before they arrived, giving the family time to compose themselves and prepare explanations, her gift showing her that the Volturi were looking for excuse to punish the Cullens or claim members of their family for the guard, but would find no legitimate violation to justify their interference. Bree Tanner's survival and surrender complicated the situation in ways that Alice had not fully foreseen. The young newborn vampire choosing to give up rather than fight, her fear and her confusion apparent in every line of her body, her genuine remorse and desire to stop fighting evident to anyone who looked carefully. Alice felt sympathy for Bree immediately and completely, seeing echoes of her own confused awakening as newborn, understanding that this girl was a victim of Victoria's manipulation rather than a willing participant in the attack, recognizing intelligence and awareness that suggested Bree could be saved and taught and integrated into civilized vampire society if given the chance. She watched helplessly as Jane interrogated Bree and determined that the newborn knew too much to be allowed to survive according to Volturi law. Watched the Cullens' attempts to argue for mercy being dismissed with cold finality. Watch Felix destroy Bree with efficient brutality that suggested such executions were routine and unremarkable to the ancient guard. Alice felt grief and rage at the waste and the injustice, at the destruction of someone who could have been saved, at the Volturi's rigid application of laws that served their power, rather than any genuine concern for justice or mercy, or the value of individual lives. Jane's obvious disappointment at finding no legitimate excuse to punish the Cullens was evident despite her surface courtesy, her gift of inflicting pain through illusion held in check only by lack of justification for using it, her interest in Alice's visions and Edward's mind-reading remaining clear and threatening, even as she acknowledged that the family had acted appropriately in defending themselves from the newborn attack. Aro's continued fascination with the Cullen family's gifts was apparent in Jane's attention and questioning, the implication clear that the Volturi leaders were watching and waiting for opportunity to claim Alice and Edward for their guard, regardless of the family's wishes or autonomy. The aftermath of the battle was relief mixed with exhaustion and grief for Bree, and renewed anxiety about the Volturi's attention. The family understanding that they had survived the immediate threat, but had also exposed themselves to scrutiny from the most powerful vampires in their world, that Jane's visit was surveillance, an implicit threat, rather than simple investigation. But they had survived. Bella was safe. Edward's proposal had been accepted, and the wedding Alice had been planning could finally move forward without the shadow of Victoria's revenge hanging over every preparation and every decision. Alice threw herself into wedding preparations with renewed energy and determination, using the project to process her own anxiety and grief about the battle's aftermath, channeling her emotions into creating perfect celebration that would mark Bella's transition from human girlfriend to Edward's wife and eventual vampire sister. She ordered flowers and arranged seating and coordinated with caterers and musicians and photographers, her visions guiding every choice to ensure the day would unfold exactly as she saw it in her most detailed and beautiful futures. Her joy at finally being able to orchestrate this wedding, something pure and uncomplicated in the midst of so much danger and death, and political maneuvering with ancient vampires who wanted to control or destroy her family. Bella's resistance to the elaborate plans was constant but half-hearted. The human girl understanding that this wedding was important to Alice and to the family, that allowing Alice to create her vision was gift Bella could give in exchange for everything the Cullens had done to protect her and accept her, and prepare to transform her into one of them permanently. Alice appreciated Bella's tolerance of the plans, even as she steamrolled over every objection and every request for simplicity, understanding that their friendship was strong enough to survive Alice's temporary tyranny over wedding details, that Bella would forgive her for the excessive elegance and attention once the day arrived, and proved to be as beautiful and meaningful as Alice had promised it would be. The wedding day arrived on August 13th in 2006, with perfect weather that Alice had foreseen weeks in advance. The Cullen house transformed into elegant venue with white flowers and silk ribbons and careful arrangements that created atmosphere of beauty and romance that even Bella could not dismiss as excessive or unnecessary. Alice had worked for months to ensure every detail matched her visions exactly. The ceremony planned down to the second, the reception choreographed to flow seamlessly from one moment to the next. Her determination absolute that this day would be perfect celebration of Edward and Bella's love, and the family's joy at finally making Bella's membership official through marriage that would precede her transformation. She prepared Bella with meticulous attention through the morning and afternoon, doing her hair and makeup with skills refined across decades of practice, helping her into the wedding dress that Alice had designed specifically to suit Bella's understated elegance and natural beauty, creating bride who looked like she belonged in fairy tale rather than small-town Washington wedding. Bella's nervousness was palpable but manageable, her anxiety about being center of attention balanced by genuine happiness about marrying Edward, her trust in Alice allowing her to surrender control and simply experience the day, rather than worrying about details that Alice had already perfected through careful planning and prescient vision. The ceremony in the Cullens' backyard was exactly as Alice had seen it in her visions. Bella walking down the aisle toward Edward with Charlie beside her. The family and friends gathered to witness their vows, the setting sun casting golden light across everything and creating magical atmosphere that made even the skeptical guests understand why Alice had insisted on such elaborate arrangements. Alice watched with satisfaction and joy as Edward and Bella exchanged their promises, seeing her visions manifesting perfectly in present reality, understanding that this moment marked a crucial step toward the future, where Bella would become vampire and sister and permanent member of their family. The reception was celebration of everything they had survived together, the attacks and the separations and the battles that had brought them to this moment of peace and happiness. The family dancing and laughing with genuine joy that had been rare during the previous 2 years of constant crisis and danger. Alice danced with Jasper and with Emmett and with Carlisle, her happiness bubbling over into laughter and movement, her relief that they had reached this milestone making her feel lighter and more carefree than she had felt since Bella first appeared in her visions and transformed their existence. The honeymoon sent Edward and Bella to Isle Esme off the coast of Brazil, Carlisle's private island where they could have privacy and safety away from Fawkes and the memories of danger that had characterized their relationship thus far. Alice watched their honeymoon through her visions intermittently and respectfully, checking only to ensure they were safe and happy, giving them privacy for the intimate beginning of their married life, her gift showing her futures that remained mostly positive and bright as they enjoyed their tropical paradise together. The pregnancy was catastrophe that Alice did not see coming because her visions went suddenly and completely dark around Bella, the blankness appearing without warning and suggesting either death or something so outside Alice's understanding of vampire nature that her gift could not process or interpret what was happening. She felt panic rising as the darkness persisted through days and then weeks. Her attempts to see Bella's future meeting only void where clear visions should have been. Her fear for her sister's safety becoming overwhelming as she tried and failed repeatedly to penetrate the blankness that suggested something terrible was occurring. Edward's frantic phone call from the island confirmed her worst fears, while also providing information that made no sense within Alice's understanding of vampire biology and possibility. His explanation that Bella was pregnant with his child seeming impossible given that vampires were frozen and unchanging and should not be capable of creating life in any form. But the pregnancy was real and progressing with supernatural speed. The half-vampire fetus growing far faster than human gestation should allow, its presence apparently creating blind spot in Alice's visions similar to the one the werewolves created, its hybrid nature making it invisible to her gift in ways that terrified her because she could not see whether Bella would survive or what the outcome would be. The family's division over the pregnancy was immediate and bitter. Rosalie, positioning herself as protector of the unborn child with fierce determination that surprised everyone given her usual hostility toward anything that threatened family stability. Edward desperate to end the pregnancy before it killed Bella. Carlisle torn between his medical oath to preserve life and his paternal desire to protect his daughter-in-law from death, he could see approaching with medical certainty. Alice found herself unable to take clear position because she could not see outcomes, could not use her gift to determine which choice would lead to better future, could not offer her usual confidence about what should be done when her visions remained stubbornly blank around the entire situation. Jasper's instinct was to eliminate the threat immediately, his protective nature toward Alice and the family making him advocate for ending pregnancy that was clearly killing Bella and creating danger they could not predict or control. Alice understood his reasoning but felt uncomfortable with solution that required destroying something that might be her niece or nephew. that might be family member deserving protection rather than threat requiring elimination. The moral complexity of the situation was overwhelming and unprecedented. Their usual dynamics and decision-making processes inadequate for navigating crisis when normal rules and normal understanding did not apply. Bella's transformation happened during the birth, when the baby broke through her body from inside. The violence and trauma of the delivery so extreme that Edward had no choice except to transform her immediately or watch her die. His venom flooding her system as he tried desperately to save her life while also delivering the child who had nearly destroyed her. Alice's visions returned explosively the moment Bella's transformation began. Futures suddenly crystallizing with vivid clarity after weeks of frustrating darkness, showing her Bella as vampire with control and grace that surpassed normal newborn capabilities, showing her adapted to immortality with surprising ease and speed that suggested her mental shield extended to protecting her from the usual newborn volatility and bloodlust. She immediately began ordering Bella's new wardrobe online, her relief and joy at having her visions back combining with her desire to ensure Bella had appropriate clothes for her new existence, her practical expression of love manifesting through ensuring her sister would be properly dressed when she woke from transformation. She prepared the cottage that Edward had built for Bella, decorating and furnishing it based on visions of what Bella would want and need, creating space that would serve as their home away from the main house, where they could have privacy while remaining close to family. Meeting Renesmee was complicated by Alice's continued inability to see the half-vampire child directly, her visions going dark around the little girl just as they had around Bella during the pregnancy. The blind spot frustrating but manageable once Alice learned to work around it by watching those who interacted with Renesmee rather than trying to perceive the child herself. She developed affection for her niece despite the limitations, understanding that Renesmee was extraordinary and precious and deserving of love, even though Alice could never see her future or use her gift to protect her the way she protected other family members. Jacob's imprinting on Renesmee created another permanent blind spot in Alice's visions. The werewolf's connection to the child, meaning that significant portions of Renesmee's life would remain hidden from Alice's perception. The frustration of having so much of her family suddenly invisible to her gift, requiring adjustment and acceptance that her role would be different with this generation than it had been with the rest of the Cullens. She learned to function with the gaps in her knowledge, trusting that others could protect what she could not see, that her gift remained valuable even if less comprehensive than it had been before Bella's transformation and Renesmee's birth. The Volturi threat emerged when Irina from the Denali Coven saw Renesmee and mistakenly believed she was immortal child. Vampire toddler created illegally by transforming human child in violation of laws that absolutely prohibited such creation. Alice saw Irina's decision to report to the Volturi through her visions, saw the ancient guard mobilizing to destroy the Cullens for violation they had not actually committed, saw the confrontation approaching in Snowy Field, where the Volturi would arrive with overwhelming force, expecting to execute the entire family for breaking their most sacred law. Her vision of the battle was devastating, showing her timeline where the Volturi attacked and destroyed significant portions of both the Cullen family and their allies, where Carlisle and Jasper and others died fighting against force too powerful and too numerous to defeat through simple combat, where everything Alice loved was torn apart because of misunderstanding about Renemé's nature. She saw the only path to survival required proof that half-vampire children matured and stabilized, rather than remaining frozen as dangerous, powerful toddlers forever. That Renemé was not violation of law, but rather unprecedented hybrid, whose existence had not been contemplated when the prohibition against immortal children was established. She made the decision to disappear without explanation to anyone except Bella, leaving note with instructions, but providing no details about where she was going or when she would return, trusting that her family would understand she was working to save them, even though her sudden departure looked like abandonment or desertion. Leaving Jasper without explanation was the hardest thing she had ever done, trusting that he would understand through their bond that she had not left him, but was rather doing what was necessary to ensure his survival and the family's continuation, that her absence was expression of love rather than betrayal. She traveled to South America following visions that showed her another hybrid, Nahuel, who was 150 years old and stable and fully matured, proof that Renesmee would not remain powerful toddler forever, but would grow and develop and eventually reach adulthood, where she would no longer represent danger that immortal children posed. Finding Nahuel and his aunt Huelen and convincing them to travel to Forks to testify before the Volturi required all of Alice's diplomatic skills and persuasive abilities, her visions showing them that their testimony would save the Cullens, while also helping them understand that their participation mattered and would not put them in danger from the ancient guard. The confrontation in the snowy field happened exactly as Alice had foreseen. The Volturi arriving with massive force, expecting easy execution, and finding instead prepared defense of dozens of vampire witnesses gathered from around the world. Carlyle's diplomatic efforts and the family's preparations buying time for Alice to arrive with the proof that would save them. She returned at the crucial moment with Nahuel and Huelen, their presence and testimony forcing Aro to acknowledge that Renesmee was not a legal immortal child, but rather a unique hybrid whose existence was not prohibited under existing law, that destroying the Cullens would be murder rather than justice. Aro's reluctance to back down was obvious despite his surface acceptance of the evidence, his desire to claim Alice and Edward for his guard remaining clear through his continued fascination and his implicit threats, his understanding that the Cullens had outmaneuvered him politically and legally, creating resentment that would persist and create future danger. But the immediate threat was resolved. The family surviving against impossible odds, Renesmee's safety assured at least temporarily, the Volturi departing without the destruction they had anticipated inflicting. The reunion with Jasper after weeks of separation was overwhelming, their bond reasserting itself with intensity that made Alice understand how much her absence had cost him emotionally, how much trust he had extended by believing she would return, and that her departure had purpose rather than being permanent abandonment. She explained everything quickly, showing him through words and through physical closeness that she had never stopped loving him, that every moment away had been torture justified only by necessity of saving their family. The future stretched ahead with clarity Alice had not experienced in months, the blind spots around Renesmee and Jacob remaining but manageable, the Volturi threat temporarily neutralized, though not permanently eliminated, the family intact and together and safe for now at least. She saw decades and centuries of existence with Bella as vampire sister and Renesmee as beloved niece. Saw the family continuing to build life together despite challenges and dangers that would inevitably arise. Saw happiness and purpose and belonging that made every struggle and every sacrifice worthwhile because they had chosen each other and would continue choosing each other across whatever immortal future awaited them all. And so Alice Cullen's story continues forward into futures she can see, but we cannot. Her gift showing her centuries of possibility and joy and continued existence with the family she chose before she ever met them, the sister and daughter and partner and friend whose optimism comes not from denial, but from literally seeing that better futures exist and are reachable through the choices they make together. She began as Mary Alice Brandon, the girl in the asylum who saw too much and remembered too little, who woke as vampire with no past but infinite futures spreading ahead of her like map of territory she would learn to navigate with supernatural precision. She waited 28 years for Jasper and saved him from despair, found the Cullens and made them complete, loved Bella before they ever met and guided her toward immortality and sisterhood, saved her family repeatedly through visions that showed danger approaching and paths that led to survival. Her tragedy was losing her human memories, never knowing who she had been or what family she had left behind, or what circumstances had led to her institutionalization and transformation. But her triumph was choosing her own family, creating identity based on futures rather than past, becoming Alice Cullen through decision and love, rather than simply accepting what circumstance provided. So rest now, gentle dreamers, with Alice's certainty that tomorrow holds possibilities worth reaching for, that choices matter and futures can be shaped, that family you choose can be stronger than family you were born into. Let her visions of hope and happiness carry you softly into peaceful sleep, where all futures remain possible and every choice leads somewhere beautiful. Good night.